How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's kmay and Mozio's David Litwak. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for How I Got Here, PhocusWire and Mozio's podcast about travel and transportation. Today with us is Ben Frank from Rotabull. Rotabull was founded in 2019 and is the easiest way to sell aircraft parts. I'll let Ben elaborate a little bit more on what that means, but thanks for joining us, Ben.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We like to start every episode with the same question. So, let's start by having you tell us how you got here.
Sure. So I can just give the short version, which is, we work in aviation software broadly. It's not something that everybody's super familiar with, but I had studied this in university, or something I guess as close as you can to aviation software that's actually a major. So I went to engineering school, studied aerospace engineering. I wasn't one of those kids who wanted to necessarily be a pilot or an astronaut from when they were in the crib, but I, had some interest with it, some interest in it in high school and college, and knew I wanted to be an engineer more broadly. Found myself kind of in the plane world and really enjoyed it. Did a few internships, did a job after college in actual aircraft engineering and airline consulting. So I had some experience in the industry. And I think after a few years doing that, I knew I wanted to work in aerospace, but I wanted to be in New York, which is where I live, where my family lives, rather than traveling around all the time and being a consultant. And that kind of led me to start my own thing with a classmate from university who's now my business partner, who I've known for about 10 years. And when we started out, we were actually doing a different aviation software business. So, David, we've actually talked about this, but there was another business called Sear, which we can get more into this later, but essentially sold aircraft usage data, something that's not really relevant to Rotabull anymore, but was an interesting business in its own right. And that's how we got started. And about 2 years in, it kind of morphed itself, and Rotabull, as it currently exists, kind of came into existence. We changed from a data product to more of a SaaS product. And that's what we've been at for the past 2 years, is kind of just growing this SaaS product that's targeted specifically at the aircraft aftermarket. So it's everything about the way that aircraft are maintained and the way that airlines source parts and repairs in order to keep them flying. And we aim to be the backbone of that ecosystem. So we started out, we were 2 people, now we're about 14, and we haven't cratered yet. So I think that takes us to, well, I shouldn't say that now that coronavirus has happened, but that's kind of takes us to today in my mind.
I see. Well, so I wanted to delve in. You mentioned Sear, and I remember that's about when we met. And if I'm not mistaken, you were selling a lot of that data to major financial institutions, I'll say. I'm curious, kind of, you started with the data play, moved to SaaS. Tell us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, it seems totally out of left field when I say it now. It didn't feel that way because it was incremental the way it happened. When we started out, we actually had an idea. We wanted to make software that reduced waste in the aftermarket. So we saw airframe manufacturers in the fixed wing and the helicopter world who were, they don't just produce planes, they produce spare parts also for a lot of their planes. And they had massive amounts of inventory, piles of parts sitting around, but still, had trouble getting these parts to the right operators in reasonable amounts of time, in reasonable service levels, 7, 14 days, whatever it is. So they're spending a ton of money on the aftermarket, but still not really making their customers happy and not making as much money as they could. And so we had this idea that, okay, we could do something around stocking strategy, and we could build this beautiful system to try to help manufacturers optimize what kinds of parts they were going to make and who they were going to be able to supply them to and where they should stock them. it turns out that product was just totally not something anyone needed, or it wasn't really specific enough, I guess you could say. It was a beautiful idea, like I said, but it just, I think it was trying to do too many things and didn't have a clear enough target user. And so we sold 0 copies of that. No one ever bought it. No one even came close to buying it. But in order to, on the road to making that, we collected a bunch of data sets that we thought were going to allow us to make this model of spare part demand. And one of those data sets was aircraft usage. Where are aircraft going? When are they going in for maintenance? When are they flying more or less? What airports? Where are they sleeping overnight? Those kinds of things. And we had this very authoritative, very clean data set of what all these aircraft were doing. And it turns out that even though the end product was not saleable, this data set was very interesting to a lot of people. And so we ended up finding customers for this data set itself in insurance companies who were looking to track their asset portfolios, in investors who were looking to track things that they might invest in. Other examples, operators who just have their fleet and want to know, where is it? Maintenance companies who wanted to know, okay, who are the aircraft that are coming to my airport, and who can I sell my services to? So that was really the data play, and I think the way that turned into Rotabull, like I said, is kind of gradual. We, after a few years, we kind of said, there's customers for this, but there's also a lot of competitors offering this. This is probably not a great long-term business for us to be in for the next 20 years. And this data is getting more and more commodity just as a data product. And there's a lot more we can do if we try to reimagine the original vision here and take another stab at it. And so Rotabull kind of was the second attempt at that original product, but like a little bit more specific. It just did one thing for one small group of people. And I think that's why I like to think maybe that's why it was more successful.
Can we delve a little bit more into kind of what Rotabull is? And so it's basically an aircraft parts marketplace, right? So you talk about the aftermarket a little bit here. So if this is me guessing here, as I think I'm as naive as maybe some of our other listeners are. I assume that means after a plane has been sold, the market for all the parts to then replace things on the plane. Is that what the aftermarket is?
Exactly. So, you buy an A320 or you lease an A320 or whatever it is, you're going to spend, let's call it $1 million a year, and just, parts, whatever, maintenance and inspections and new bearings and new seat back screens when a kid punches a pencil through the back of the seat back, whatever it is, right? You're going to need lots of things. And that's like what I'm calling the aftermarket. So Rotabull is a system for sellers in the aftermarket. These are distributors, manufacturers, repair shops to get their goods to the airlines with less pain, I guess you could say.
Hi, Ben. And how was that done before?
With a lot of paperwork, a lot of faxes, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's sort of one of those very cool niches that still kind of ran, like it's the same way that it did in 1992 or whatever. If I'm Delta and I wanted to get something, let's say a bearing, I'd go and I'd send 10 RFQs, let's say, to a bunch of different vendors who I think have that bearing, and they'd get back to me in maybe a day or two, and they'd say, hey, I have this thing, or I don't have this thing, and here's the price for it. And then I'd negotiate with them a little bit and ask them for some diligence paperwork to kind of prove that they actually have the part versus that they're just going to go buy it from someone else and resell it to me. If they give that to me and I'm okay with their paperwork, then I'm going to pick out of the vendors that satisfy my requirements, and I'm going to give them a purchase order. And then they're going to acknowledge the purchase order, send me a sales order, send me they're going to initially issue a pick ticket internally. They're going to send me an invoice. Then they're going to send me a credit card authorization form or a credit application. I'm going to fill that out. I'm going to send it back. They're going to ship it, send an airway bill, all this different stuff. And that's only like about half the steps. But all of these things are like email attachments and faxes and just kind of takes 4 to 7 days to work through all the goop of this stuff.
It's astonishing that you would assume, and this is perhaps my naivety about the minutiae of the aviation industry, that the main manufacturers, whether you're a Boeing, an Embraer, or an Airbus, would have some kind of system in place like this for the aircraft that they manufacture.
Yeah, so Boeing, the bigger OEMs, it's a little less chaotic than it is with other vendors, just because you're right, they've made some IT investments and they have a portal where you can go and you can sort of look for stuff and send in a request for a quote a little bit more seamlessly. At the same time, most of the stuff you buy on the airplane is not from Boeing once you own the airplane. Most of it's from distributors or the actual component manufacturer. So you're going to go get the avionics from replacement parts from Thales or Honeywell or whatever, and you're going to go get the paint from PPG, and you're going to go get the whatever from whoever made it.
Okay, and I just last one from me for a second. I mean, you had the original product, which was the data product, as you called it, and then you went into the current, essentially the marketplace. What's the kind of time scale we're looking at between the first one and you realizing that maybe you should pivot into something else? Was that a few years? What was the time scale?
Yeah, it's probably on a couple years. Rotabull didn't have. So Sear started in 2016, mid 2016, and then Rotabull has kind of gradually come into existence over the last couple of years, with it really gathering steam in the last year, when started to bring on really grow the team, and really expand outside the U.S. and take some steps to really grow it. So I would say probably took a couple years for us to start looking at other things beyond just the core data product.
Okay. So what I think is most interesting about kind of what you're doing, Ben, is, there's a lot of us who kind of start in the B2C world and end up in B2B, but it's a lot easier to be like, well, I take trains and there's a system behind the trains and you end up learning about the system a little bit, and hence you get a Silverado or an Amadeus or something like that. But usually the types of people who create businesses like Rotabull are someone who literally worked in aircraft part maintenance or something for 20 years at American Airlines or something like that, to even know that the problem exists. And I feel like you're 2 to 3, 4 layers deeper than any of us are into like a part of the industry that barely gets talked about. And it's, so there's a lot of questions I think I have about that, but I'll start with one, which is like, how did you come to even know that this problem really exists? And do you what are your suggestions for other people figuring out other problems like this that aren't just, already obvious to everyone else who just travels normally?
And this is it's my favorite type of problem for that reason, is that it's kind of like the secret duct tape that does hold the industry together. It's not the only secret duct tape. I mean, they're all over in other little areas, but I think this is one of those things that really is a totally critical piece of infrastructure, the parts supply chain. And there's Delta's buying $1 billion worth of things, and it's real. It really adds up to something, but it's not. It's not something that most people interact with. Strangely, actually, a lot of people who go to business school ask about this and have some familiarity with it, because there's this company TransDigm, which is a manufacturer of certain types of legacy parts, which has been featured in a lot of business school case studies for some reason. I can't tell you why. So whenever we talk about what we're doing and we're making software for the maintenance, repair, and overhaul industry, to anybody who's been to business school, they always start talking about TransDigm. So I think some people know a little bit about this, for just random reasons. But I think you're right. Most in the travel industry, it's a little weird. And I guess that my recommendation would just be that you have to see it to know about it. For me, that came from the experiences I had as a consultant. And the experience I'd had as a pilot and as an engineer, just seeing different angles. I think there's really no shortcut to that. You can do customer research once you have an inkling that something might exist, but you can't. It's hard to just pull it out of thin air unless you've seen it, I guess.
Sorry,
so I think
I want to quickly. You said you were a pilot. I must have missed that if you've mentioned it before. You were a pilot.
Yeah. amateur. Just put it out there. I was never did that for work. But it was, it was kind of in college when I got really interested in aviation. I started flying at a nearby airport as well, planes and helicopters, and that was kind of one of the ways that I learned about the industry and got involved with it. And you got to take the plane in for maintenance, and you have to have someone sign off on it, and they have to do things to it. And so I think you just start to get some exposure from all these different angles.
How did you come up with or how did you go through your own customer discovery? Did you talk to manufacturers first, or did you talk to airlines first?
We started with the sell side, or we exist on the seller side, I guess you could say, and that's the manufacturers or the distributors or the repair shops. Airlines also sell stuff because they have excess inventory of parts that they sell all the time. But we really started with the smaller businesses, and it's much easier to get access to talking to smaller businesses and building for them because they don't have, I don't know, Ariba and Salesforce and SAP and all these things that, enterprise salespeople have spent years jamming down the airline's throats. These just big enterprise SaaS solutions, the distributors and the manufacturers don't have any of that stuff. They tend to be a little bit smaller businesses who are much happier to talk to you, to have you help them, and you don't need to take them out for golf and steak dinners.
Interesting. So just to to recap there, you started with these kind of small parts manufacturers, and what's interesting is I think you've seen this kind of pattern with a lot of the people in business travel. We interviewed Travel Bank. We also interviewed Duke from Travel Bank. We also interviewed the founder of, or I guess kind of founder or president of Amex GBT. And one thing I think I noticed is that Travel Bank's go-to-market strategy seemed to be very similar, which there's not these big enterprise customers have 45 different dependencies, and if you're talking about a 2-year RFP or whatever, and so was that on purpose, or did you did you just kind of stumble into that?
I think it was on purpose to go for smaller sellers before anybody bigger, and the reason is just exactly what you said. There's sort of a sales reason and there's a product reason. I think the sales reason is it's easier to talk to these smaller businesses. They're not doing necessarily formal RFP processes. You can reach them in a direct outbound strategy. You can reach a decision maker at a trade show, and it's just shorter cycle, versus, like you said, a 2-year process with Amex or with Boeing to do anything. There's also a product reason, which is just that you can produce something useful to them in less time because they don't need to integrate with everything under the sun. Now, we did take a very integration heavy approach to the product early on, because we sort of said from day one, the product actually does need to integrate with their inventory management system to provide them the value that we want and to have the sort of stickiness that we think it will need. But it's still much easier to do that with a smaller company than it is a bigger company.
So I wanted to go back to something you said before. So Sear was, Rotabull V1, and you eventually, you did an admirable pivot, kind of to selling the data after the original failed product, and then this is basically kind of a second pivot. One quick question, then a follow-up question: are you still selling that data to anyone?
Yeah. So I don't want to sound too defensive here. I wouldn't call it a failed product.
Okay.
No, it's okay. It's totally fair. I mean, you could call it that. I think it's fine to call it that.
For what it's worth, I meant the first one. You said that the one that got you sold 0 users or something like that, and then this came out of it. That's what I meant. But go on.
That we can call a failed product.
Okay, cool.
No, so Sear, we're not doing anything with that. Sear still exists, and still has. Still is a business with customers, with a team supporting it, and it's not necessarily doesn't have the kind of really exciting end vision that something like Rotabull has, at least to me. But it's it's very much still a going concern.
So yeah, my follow-up question to that was, I think it takes a lot psychologically to change tack like that. And I know this from, Mozio's 9 years old, and we started back in a more traditional thing, and we've had to shift our business towards doing a lot more on demand and the world of new mobility and stuff like that. And you see people in our industry sticking with the same thing they've done for 15 years and kind of like head in sand thinking, well, this is where I make my money and I'm going to continue going further down this pathway. And I think it's not a business, even it's not a business challenge. I feel like it's almost like a psychological challenge more than anything else to kind of pull your attention away from something that is making some money and divert it to someplace else. So I don't know how you thought about that, but I'd love to, you did a pretty abrupt about face here. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a moment when you go through that, when you ask yourself, do I really want to, after getting this off the ground, even if it's not where I might hope it would be in my wildest dreams, it's somewhere, and it's taken a while to get there. And so, do I really want to go back into the thick of it and start from zero again, or do I want to go to Puerto Rico and whatever, just like sit on the beach somewhere or
and run a lifestyle business or something?
Yeah. Pick your equivalent place, whatever does that for you. But I mean, I think that's sort of, if I'm being honest, like definitely I think there's a moment where at least I had that thought, but I think I was pretty interested and pretty excited about this problem, and really felt like it was an opportunity to build for a group of users who hadn't had anything built for them in the recent, in the last 10 years, and to really build a greenfield app that I think had a lot of potential. And so, I didn't have the thought about Puerto Rico for too long.
Okay. And Ben, I'm interested. I mean, the aviation industry is so big, it's so diverse. There are so many parts, there are so many airlines, there's so many storage facilities, there are so many maintenance facilities in locations in thousands of places around the world. How have you considered and thought about expansion? Where do you start from that? You said you're a team of, forgive me if I've got the number of a team of 14 people, I think you said a little while ago. How do you think about scaling up, and where do you go first for that?
So it's both, there's two sides to this that I think are a great benefit of being in the aviation industry, and then a great challenge, which is that it's so international, right? And so to really succeed and be a lasting business, you need to be everywhere, because, and I'm sure you see this in other, non-maintenance aviation businesses and travel businesses too. We can't just have point of sale in the US and succeed and be a winner. We need to be everywhere. And so that's part of the challenge. But I think where it helps us actually is that when it comes to software, it's a little easier because there's a global standard in aviation. Mostly businesses trade in dollars. There's some, there's a little bit that happens in other currencies, but parts, airlines are used to paying their biggest expenses for fuel, for leases in dollars. And so, occasionally in euros or pounds. So that helps us. Also, almost everyone speaks, very good English and uses English for business. So when it comes to internationalization of the product, we get a huge head start because most of our users are doing the same thing no matter what country they're in.
Yeah.
With some places in Asia being a little bit different, but I would say for the most part that holds true. As far as physical presence, I think we run into the problems of providing on the ground support and fast response times and having a network that extends to different places, and that's just, it takes time to build the network. I think today we have reasonable density in the Americas and in Europe. In both in the UK and in continental Europe. I think with Asia, it's still earlier for us, although we do have some. So I guess we haven't so far had we don't have a war room where we have the map, like a map where it's colored and it's like, we're going here first and then we're going here and then we're going to expand to here. It's not so methodical as that yet. I think more it's like, we wait till there's a critical mass in a country who's asking us, and then, hey, we need you to support this thing or this currency or this, local address format or whatever it is, right? And then we do it, and we get some local references and get them to help us out there.
And you know, going back to this 14 person team, if you had 100 people on your team, would that be that expansion would it be for sales, would it be for tech support, or would it be for something else? I mean, what does expansion give you? Does it just allow you to have, as you said, people on the ground in markets that you just frankly can't reach at the moment?
Yeah, it does. I mean, once you start to get bigger and people are paying you more money, right? They start to expect things like certain kinds of SLAs. That requires um, are all the listeners going to be familiar with like what a SLA stands for?
Yeah.
Probably. Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. I saw no acronym, so I just wanted to.
No,
sure.
I think SLAs are good with it. It's fine.
Okay. So that, that costs money. That's reliability engineers. Then, they're going to want fast support in their language. That's, support expense. And, it goes on and on, right? So each thing has a cost. People start to expect things as you get bigger. But I think probably if we were to have 100 people, it'd be a lot in, in product and engineering. There's just so much to build. We're like any software business, right? There's just too much to build. And then of course, some in sales and marketing as well, because we're an extremely lean team, and you just can't canvas the world with a couple people. So I think that's kind of the way I think about it. At the same time, 100 people the business would probably crumble under its own weight at this point. I think we need a few steps before we're there.
Yeah, just the last one from me for a moment. I mean, it's how did you come upon the business model, and did that have to change over time? And I'm assuming if it's a SaaS product, is it kind of a renting service? How does it work, or on a commission? How did you come up with that? And did you have to tweak it with any resistance or anything like that?
So it's a kind of standard SaaS monthly or annual fee model where customers are paying us a certain amount for a subscription, which varies based on their tier of kind of how much business they're doing through Rotabull, and then there are a few kind of other optional services they can tack on and things like that. It's nothing too crazy. We did iterate on it, a couple times. Actually, first to raise the fees, then to lower the fees, and then actually to raise them again. So, I think that's something that probably continues to evolve forever. It's like never, like with airlines, right? They have huge staffs of people to change the pricing every hour. It's maybe not that complex for us, but it does continue to evolve.
Yeah.
How is this for Mozio, David? Did the pricing change a lot over time?
No, I mean, we're not technically SaaS, so we're technically per transaction. So we just, we do some tinkering, but I can't say we have legions of people trying to do as much revenue generation as we could otherwise. Though this crisis has definitely made us think a little bit more along in that direction about how to maximize profit, which brings me to, kind of what's going on in the world right now. Needless to say, all of our businesses, well, I think Kevin's business and writing about all of us in crisis might be the only one thriving at the moment.
I couldn't possibly comment on that at the moment.
But for the rest of us, right, obviously business is way down or non-existent. For if you're grounded, you don't need spare parts anymore. So I'm kind of curious about how you're looking at this. You see a lot of SaaS providers in the business, giving free months to their clients to try to help them get past things. Mozio has certainly been the beneficiary of a lot of our software providers doing that to us. I'm curious what your two things. One, what is your outlook on the market, and two, like how do you see this impacting the part of the travel industry that you deal with most, specifically, all these small mom and pop, airline parts manufacturers, maybe not mom and pop, but, smaller than Boeing, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a crisis for a lot of this whole ecosystem, because all the cash that's going into the airlines, what little cash is going into the airlines and what little cash remains is going to the workers, as it probably should, and is going to is going to not the vendor base, other things other than the vendor base. And so for our customers who are, the vendors to the airlines, they still have to supply parts, but, they're not really getting paid, or they're getting paid net 30, but really 90 days, or whatever it might be. And they just have to extend credit to the airlines, and sort of just if they want the sale. And so, I think it's tested a lot of these businesses, and not all the businesses will survive, although I think most of them will. We're definitely chosen to extend certain like preferential pricing and pricing for during this time, because I think you just don't get around it, right? I think if you want to keep your customers and you want to be good to your customers, and they don't have money to pay you but still need the product, I think there's really only one thing that you should do, and so we did have to do that or have chosen to do that for a good number of our customers, and probably will do that for a while, because I think strangely, actually, Rotabull, is something that is sort of more useful during this time, but less interesting to companies because they don't have, they're not looking to buy stuff. So I'll give you an example of that. If you get a sale from an airline today, and you're trying to fax them a credit card authorization form so they can give you payment information so you can process their sale. The seller can't go to their office and use the fax machine, right? So how are they going to process that sale? So something like Rotabull, which allows you to do stuff digitally that you used to do in an analog way, is actually much more useful when you're working remotely. The problem is no one cares, and no one wants to hear that if it costs money, right? And so, I think other industries have said, like, this is like 2 years of digitization happening in a few months. I think Satya Nadella or someone from Microsoft said that when they were looking at the Azure sales going through the roof. And it's really, that's what we've seen as well, which is that there's just so much digitization and adoption of technology happening just completely by necessity. So also at some level, we don't want to miss out on that, right? And if the thing that we have to do is offer the product at a reduced price, I mean, that's a low cost to pay for those customers.
And just a last one from me, really. I mean, in this kind of vein around coronavirus, how are you as a business? I know you talked about what you're doing with extending payments and things like that, but what have you had to do yourselves as a business to kind of get through it? Because presumably, because you've had to do those things with your customers, there becomes a point where things get a little bit lean, perhaps on the cash flow front for you. What have you had to put in place, whether it's from a leadership perspective or a business model perspective, to get through this indeterminately long period?
Yeah, so we're lucky where our sales don't directly correlate with flight volumes, which is the case for most of our customers. So we're not as exposed to the direct forces as many of our customers, but of course we still do have to be responsive to it. So there's no we're in a position where we don't need to make any kind of layoffs or do anything drastic. We're in a position of, I think, the luxury of relative strength, and so I think we're being very conservative about our expenditures because we don't know how long the impacts of this are going to last. But we've avoided any kind of drastic action.
Well, Ben, thank you for your time. That was a super insightful look into, I think, a part of the travel industry we don't often hear about. This has been How I Got Here with Mozio and PhocusWire, our podcast about innovation in travel and transportation. And thanks again, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more inside stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.